opening my contacts book for the first time to reveal the secrets of what it really takes to be a murder detective.
So I was taking this one very personally. I wanted to look him in the face to show him that we'd beaten him.
On the front line, exposing how we solve the most heinous of crimes.
It was a truly shocking case that's destroyed the life of a family.
Welcome to Secrets of a Murder Detective.
The murder of Julian Hastings in January 2017 was one of South East London's most challenging cases. I'm going to be meeting the senior investigating officer to understand what really happened, the pressures, the setbacks, and the techniques they used to eventually bring the killer to justice.
My name is Richard Leonard. I'm a former Detective Chief Inspector with the Metropolitan Police, which I served for 30 years. This was an abhorrent offence. The investigation into the murder of Julian Hastings was a real challenge to myself and my team. We had a number of hurdles which we needed to climb over.
Richard, good to see you. Thanks for coming in.
Cheers, thank you.
Richard, the case we're talking about today was from January 2017. What was your role?
At that time, I was Detective Chief Inspector running a murder team based at Lewisham in South East London.
When were you first aware of it?
The initial call came in at 3:15 in the afternoon. A member of the public had seen smoke billowing out from underneath a door of an address in Birchhanger Road, South Norwood, originally called London Fire Brigade.
Emergency service.
When they attend, they find elderly female and she has sadly passed away. The circumstances appear suspicious. My officers from the homicide team were called to that incident because we have a dead body.
In London, there are 20 murder teams, and they will provide 24-hour cover.
Yes, so we were the on-call team for South London, and we would be called out for any suspicious incident involving death, a major crime.
As a murder detective, one of the most valuable processes that I used to go through was to visit a crime scene. And being a good detective is often about being observant, and I call it seeing, not looking. You know, sometimes I just stand there and look around a room, looking for things that might be out of place, things that don't look quite right, disturbances that tell you a story. But you can only do that by visiting the crime scene. Is that something you did?
Yeah, absolutely. I went out to the scene and had a look. There had been a fire, but the seat of the fire was at the stairway, which was quite close to where the body was. She had burn damage to her leg, and there was some burn damage to her braids. But what was really interesting was that there was a table that was broken.
How easy was that to identify who this lady was?
The person was an elderly lady called Julian Hastings, who was 74 years old. At this point, we had no idea what the cause of death was for Julian. One of the considerations was potentially smoke inhalation, because there was clearly a fire in the property.
When it comes to collecting evidence, fire is probably the worst enemy of a crime scene investigator. It's going to make it an extra challenge and is likely to have destroyed any traces left behind by the suspect. So in terms of the fire itself, how bad was it?
Most of the damage was in the stairway, where there was some burnt napkins. But what was interesting was that within the kitchen, there was some napkins that had been broken out of their plastic seal. And it looked like they may have been set light from a gas ring that was still alight when the fire officers arrived.
As you're describing this to me, my mind's going to someone maybe potentially trying to destroy evidence with the fire.
The only rational explanation for that would be they're trying to cover their tracks, trying to destroy evidence, you know, and essentially burn the body of the person, which is really quite disturbing to think about.
It's quite callous, isn't it?
It's incredibly callous.
One of the most important aspects of any murder investigation is identifying the lifestyle and the background of the victim. It's often referred to as victimology.
We managed to speak to her family quite quickly. Yulin was a retired nurse. She'd worked as a midwife for 30 years. She was very well regarded in the local community.
As a law-abiding pillar of the community, the situation that we find Yulin in, it just doesn't make sense. So what happened? My name is Dr. Shaham Das. I'm a consultant forensic psychiatrist. I act as an expert witness, so that's giving evidence during criminal trials. What do we know about Yulin Hastings? She's 74. She's a regular churchgoer. She has a large family. So first impressions is she is not somebody that you'd expect to get into a violent confrontation. She's not somebody that's going to have a lot of enemies.
Although it was a house fire, there was evidence that the house had been burgled.
So there were signs of burglary. What did they look like?
There's been forced entry into the property.
You've got to establish first, there might be a reason why the back door to the property is already broken. My name's Jason Dean, and I'm a forensic fire investigator with over 30 years in the West Midlands Fire Service. And it might be that Yulin had to break into the property herself because she'd forgotten her keys. You have to consider that.
So police there were presented with what looks like a burglary, fire, and a dead body.
The offender had used the wheelie bin that was at the front of the property and put that by the side gate, used the wheelie bin to climb over the side gate and then gone into the rear garden where they have found a stone or rock and used that to smash the rear window. There was a key in the window itself from the inside which he used to unlock, and he climbed in.
But the beauty of a break-in is you can tell by marks on glass whether the window's been broken before or after the fire. You get shards of glass, quite sharp, pointy pieces of glass. And the edge of the glass has got marks on it that are called conchoidal cracks that show direction of impact, so you can tell whether the window's been broken from inside or outside. So then you can say at a fire scene when you find this glass, the window was broken from outside and somebody entered the property.
At that point, he then conducts what police refer to as an untidy search, which is essentially he's pulling drawers out, he's going through those drawers, he's trying to find cash and jewellery, and there's furniture that's also been moved.
So that's quite specific, isn't it? Taking a wheelie bin, putting it by a fence, climbing over and using a rock to get in.
Yeah, that's a very, very specific MO. So that was a starting point for our investigation in terms of identifying a potential suspect.
What was starting to go through your mind about what had happened?
My hypothesis at that point was that actually Yulin had been in the property when the individual broken in and probably disturbed them. There could have been some kind of scuffle. The fact that there was a broken table would suggest that either she's in that scuffle she'd fallen on the table and it broken, or actually the table been used to strike her. She was in her dressing gown, so it looked like she'd either just had a bath or a shower, or she may have been asleep. At that point, I had no idea whether Yulin had been assaulted or whether she'd been overcome by smoke.
At this very early stage, was there any indication of who it may have been that had committed this crime?
Well, this was quite interesting because what happened on this particular incident was that at 3:15, a member of the public reports that they see smoke coming from under the doorway of Yulin's home address. But 15 minutes prior to that report, in Davison Road, which is very, very close to where Birchhanger Road is, a male suspect had been disturbed committing a burglary in a residential premises. So while my officers were at the scene dealing with the incident involving Yulin, some 2 to 3 roads down, a male offender had been disturbed by the occupant and had then made off. The homeowner returned to their property and they saw someone was in the house, so they called police. Local uniformed officers weren't very far away and they responded straight away to the call.
What happened?
And when they realised police officers were there, they attempted to escape via a rear bedroom window and had got onto the top of the conservatory. Police officers are actually in the garden. They're trying to talk the person off of the conservatory, which they're now standing on. The intruder then makes their escape, and what you see on body-worn video footage is them bounding over fences and into other gardens, jumping up and down off of shed roofs, and they eventually chase that person to an address which is very, very close by, and he climbs onto the roof of a carport. He's completely surrounded by uniform officers at this stage. What you can then see on the footage is what appears to be latex gloves. He starts to suggest he's going to harm himself.
I suppose the complicating factor here is he had a knife.
Yeah, absolutely. He's got a knife, so officers clearly didn't want to climb up onto the roof in case he tried to assault them with a knife. This is a fast, dynamic situation. So he's taken his phone out and he's breaking his phone up, almost as if there's information on that phone that could implicate in him something.
So you must have been really keen to understand who the person was on this roof.
After 5 hours, he was the negotiator managed to coax him off of the roof. When he came down, he was arrested by uniformed officers on suspicion of burglary. He gave false details, and they put him on the live scan, which is essentially a fingerprint system. The identity came back that he was a person called Aaron File. Aaron was a well-known prolific burglar. I have officers back at Lewisham Police Station who are doing fast-time intelligence inquiries, and they start looking at Aaron File. He got convicted in 2015 for a number of burglaries and was put in prison, and he got released the following year. And when we looked at the way that Aaron committed his burglaries, he would go to the front door of a premises, knock on the door, see if an occupant was in. If they wasn't in, he would gain entry via a side gate or via a side fence, go into the back garden, remove a rock or stone, and use that to smash a rear window and gain entry to the property in that way. Now, that was exactly the MO of the burglary that occurred at Birchanger Road, where Yulin's body was found. So, obviously, you have to keep a very, very, very open mind in these circumstances, but it was really clear to me right from the very beginning, this was no coincidence.
It's no secret that police look for forensic evidence at crime scenes, fingerprints, DNA, etc. Now, imagine if your job is to commit crime. If you're a burglar, you're going to be more aware than anybody that you do not want to be leaving your fingerprints and DNA behind. So if a murder was to occur in these circumstances, it's going to make the challenge for the police that much harder to find DNA. In the police, there are different levels of interviewers. The top interviewers are known as Tier 3. And it's these officers that generally are used to interview murder suspects.
Yeah, so the two officers that were deployed to interview Aaron were both Tier 3 officers. So within the interview, the suspect stated he hadn't been anywhere near Yulin's home address and was also very, very confident that we would not find any forensic evidence that would place him in the property or in close proximity to Yulin.
What did he say about the other burglary that he was chased away from?
He admitted that because he'd been disturbed in that property, so there wasn't really much he could do about that. And he was absolutely adamant he was not involved. He was not involved in the murder. That's not something that he does.
So it's almost like he's preempting a narrative for the police, which is, you know, I am a burglar, but I'm absolutely not a murderer. I am a criminal, but I have a moral code. Burglary is one thing, but murder is another.
When the person is arrested for murder, initially police are allowed to keep them for 24 hours. With the authorisation of a police superintendent, that can be extended by another 12 hours to a total of 36 hours. After this, the police would need to go to a magistrate's court and apply for warrants of further detention. The maximum that police can keep anybody in custody for murder is 96 hours or 4 days. What you were looking for was enough evidence within that time for you to be able to go to the Crown Prosecution Service.
Yeah, absolutely. But there was never any point that I was confident that we had enough evidence against Aaron File.
No SIO wants to or likes to release a person out into the public who they think has killed someone.
That was a real massive concern to me. The last thing I wanted to do was to release Aaron File on bail back into the community. The research identifies that Aaron's been at large. He's been on the run for a number of months since at least October 2016. Aaron was subject to a recall to prison because he breached the terms and conditions of his prison licence and probation couldn't find him. What it meant was that we did have some degree of control over him. He got recalled to prison, so Aaron wasn't being released back into the community.
So that must have been a relief. It will almost give your investigation a bit more breathing space.
It was essentially an insurance policy for us, but what it didn't mean was we could take our foot off the gas at this stage and not really push for the inquiries that need to be completed to try and prove Aaron's involvement. But it was something that I could tell Yulin's family that actually, no, although I wasn't in a position to charge him at this point, he was going back to prison.
A crucial stage of any murder investigation is the post-mortem. The ones that are carried out for murders are different, aren't they, for everyday post-mortems? And they would be conducted by a forensic pathologist.
Yeah, I actually went to the post-mortem and it's quite a traumatic experience. You have a human being there and you're going through a clinical evidential process and you need to try and determine the cause of death, and the way to do that is to examine various organs within the body.
But they'll also be trying to see if they can ascertain the circumstances around the death.
What was really interesting was that Yuli had no soot deposit within her airway, which would indicate that she hadn't died of smoke inhalation, which was really important. So the possible explanation for that was she was either dead before the fire was started, or because there was a natural chimney effect where the fire went up the stairway and she was actually on the floor unconscious at that point when the pathologist examined her skull and there was some blood pooling under the skull in her brain. Now, one of the decisions that was made, which was incredibly sensitive, was that Yulin's brain was removed and it was sent for further assessment because it was really, really important for us to determine and clarify exactly how she died.
So you went to this post-mortem hoping that it would give you a cause of Yulin's death. It must have been incredibly disappointing that when you walked away you didn't have that.
It is disappointing. I've been in many situations before where actually the person hasn't been murdered. They may have died of natural causes. And obviously you can't rule that out at this stage. It was really, really, really important for the investigation to determine what Yulin's cause of death was. But from my experience, having to do the further tests and examinations that were required, I knew that was now going to take some time.
In incidents where a fire is involved, detectives will call on the assistance of a fire investigator, an expert trained in identifying things such as how a fire started or where it may have started.
People's perception of fire is that it destroys evidence, so it's commonly used to destroy a fire scene. It's really important for us as investigators to determine what hasn't happened as much as what did happen. We need to rule out every possible scenario to get to the point where we know what's occurred. So there's commonly perceived accelerants, which are like petrol, diesel, white spirit, that sort of thing. And all it is, an accelerant is something that helps develop the fire. So a screwed up piece of paper can be an accelerant, a bit of cloth can be an accelerant.
I suppose an important question that would need to be answered here is, was that fire started deliberately or was it an accident?
Yeah, so it was quite clear from that examination that the fire was started deliberately.
So in this instance, the perpetrator sets fire to the napkin, will allow a flame to burn for long enough to set fire to clothing Yulin was wearing, to allow that fire to burn more severely and hopefully destroy the evidence.
So this is a really important stage of your investigation, isn't it?
When I received the final fire assessment report, there was a part of the report that was a real challenge. So within most household goods, particularly carpet, there is a degree of arsenic in the weave. And within his report, he stated that there's a possibility that Yulin could have inhaled toxic fumes from the carpet, and then that may have been the cause of her death.
So that would really have affected whether or not you got a charge for murder.
So I had a really detailed conversation with the crime scene manager. What they recommended was that we send Yulin's blood to the lab to do toxicology and examine the blood to see if there's any substances within her bloodstream that she could have, has she inhaled arsenic fumes from the carpet.
That must have been a worry for you.
So if that had come back with a positive result of arsenic in the blood, that would have prevented the CPS from authorising a charge for murder. But fortunately, the results came back as clear, and that we could rule out inhalation of a toxic fume from the carpet as being a cause of death for Yulin.
You have to prove a murder, and to prove a murder, there must be some indication that this person has caused a death. And at this stage, you didn't have that.
No, absolutely. You have to prove that their death was caused by those acting unlawfully. We also had to try and prove or disprove Aaron Files' involvement in the murder of Yulin Hastings. The initial forensic assessment of the scene at Birchhanger Road suggested to us that there was very limited, if no, forensic opportunities. So the intelligence gathering, what that identified, that Aaron was responsible previously for over 100 burglaries. And within those burglaries, there was a really, really clearly defined MO. So what we noticed was that there was an upsurge in reported burglaries in the South Norwood area. We looked at using a geographical profiler to establish whether Aaron was responsible for those burglaries.
During the investigation into Yulin Hastings' murder, detectives brought in the help of a geographic profiler. Now, these aren't used all the time. Actually, they're used quite rarely. Their job is to look at the location of offences and where a suspect may live and see if any link can be drawn between them.
Now, in case of Farley, he was a very prolific offender, and there are aspects of his offending that could provide a signature. My name is Ian Oldfield. I specialised in the analysis of locations, i.e. the geography. I worked for the Metropolitan Police Service in London for around 30 years. We all leave a huge digital footprint when we travel, whether it's going shopping, going to work, visiting the pub. And there are cameras in many locations. There is your phone data is captured on cell sites. That model applies the same to criminals. They go and visit friends, they visit family, they pick up drugs, whatever. They go committing offences. And that was the genesis of the idea for geographical profiling, where we all have these points that we visit. From home, we normally call that the anchor point. And it's between those locations of travelling when criminals will look for opportunities for crime, whether that's a burglary, robbery, or whatever. 87% of criminals operate to this pattern. That is that they travel out from a central location, usually the home address, and they commit the crime and return to the home address, a place of safety. You might also then have an opportunity to research the area for CCTV, and for someone like me, they are mapped spatially and provide a richer picture of what's happened in the area.
So the CCTV inquiries that we conducted actually did give us footage of Aaron File in Birchhanger Road. at approximately 1:30 on the afternoon of the 10th of January 2017. Unfortunately, it didn't put him directly outside Yulin's house, but it did show to us that he was in close proximity. But this was about an hour and a half prior to the fire actually being reported to the London Fire Brigade.
Geographical profiling is a very specialist technique using a geographical information system.
There was a significant number that could be linked on those factors. Based on the way the burglaries were being committed and looking at previous offending histories and patterns, they could say that the person committing the burglaries lived relatively close by.
What this isn't going to do is tell you exactly where the person lived. And it's going to tell you the burglaries were likely to have been committed by the same person. In all honesty, though, when it comes to going to court and trying to convict someone of murder, that's going to be very difficult to use on its own, isn't it?
It was going to be incredibly difficult. It was going to be massively difficult. So what we found in terms of Aaron Files' phone, that there was movement on the phone when the burglaries were being committed. But the challenge was for us that we also established that Aaron File was now living with his girlfriend, who lived in South Norwood, and she lived incredibly close to where this burglary series was taking place. We could never say that he wasn't at that property.
So this must be really frustrating. You've got a really good suspect in your mind for a murder, but you just can't quite get the evidence to prove it against him.
Yeah, it was incredibly frustrating. And in the back of my mind, I'm also conscious of the fact that time is ticking. You know, he's not going to be in prison forever. Days, weeks are going by, months are going by, and I'm already starting to think about, if I don't have the evidence to charge him, I'm going to have an incredibly difficult conversation with Yulin's son and daughter.
There's only so much investigators can glean from just visually looking at body. On the surface, not all the injuries will be apparent. There may be bruising under the skin, there may be internal injuries. So the post-mortem will be crucial to understand what's going on underneath the skin level.
We're now weeks into the investigation. All the brain examinations have been completed, and the official cause of death is blunt force trauma to the head. Basically what's happened is that Yulin's been hit over the head with an implement. We don't know exactly what that is, but there's a good chance it is the broken table that we found in the property.
That must have been a good feeling, because as a murder investigator, you might form an idea of what may have happened, but you might be wrong. But as the information's coming in, it's actually supporting what your initial thoughts were.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we now have a cause of death. What we see evidentially within Yulin's property is supporting how she died and what was used. But also, we're starting to get to the point where we are getting closer to Aaron File and getting closer to proving that he was responsible for the murder of Yulin Hastings. So I'd met with Yulin's family and they wanted justice. How could someone do this to their mother?
If you watch police crime dramas, you may be forgiven for thinking that police get results from their DNA tests quite quickly, within hours. Unfortunately, reality isn't quite like that. When a murder occurs, the investigation team will be allowed about 3 or 4 fast-track submissions. What is most likely to yield either DNA or fingerprints, let's send that up first. Sometimes in murder investigations, your whole case can turn on one piece of evidence. Did anything like that happen here?
We had this kind of really, really significant development. Approximately 3 months into the investigation, we get a really, really fantastic result back from the lab. Yulin's nail clippings came back with, we found a male DNA profile under the nails, and that male DNA profile was Aaron Files. Oh my God, we've got forensic evidence against him. The thing we never thought we were going to get we now had. It showed that Aaron File had been very, very close proximity, had probably been in some kind of struggle with Yulin, and there was skin debris from Aaron File's face under her fingernails, and that's how the profile was developed.
So as a team, this must have been, I mean, a moment of elation, really.
We now have a huge step forward in the investigation in the fact we can now link Aaron to the murder of Yulin Hastings.
Lockhardt's exchange principle is the basis on which all modern forensic science is based. And the principle is that every contact leaves a trace. When a body is examined, one of the best places to try and find DNA or fingerprints or skin sample or hair is behind the nails of a victim. In actual fact, I've always said to myself, if ever I'm attacked and I wanted to make sure the person attacking me was known, I would make sure I'd scrape them with my nails, because that is the best place we're likely to find DNA. So now you've got the MO, you've got the CCTV, even the phone work becomes more relevant here when you can actually say, well, you weren't at your girlfriend's house, the DNA puts you at Yulin's house. So suddenly you've now got what is looking like a very strong case.
We went to the CPS to seek authority to charge. However, at that point, they wanted to negate that Yulin and Aaron hadn't come into contact with each other at a previous time or day, which could account for how or why his DNA was under her fingernails. And that was a really frustrating point for us. It was like a game of snakes and ladders. You take 4 steps forward and go 5 backwards. That was another very difficult conversation with Yulin's family, because they knew we had DNA, they knew we could identify Aaron File. You know, it was really, really difficult. And I found myself caught in a very, very challenging situation.
When murder detectives are carrying out their work, you're doing it on behalf of the victim and the family. So when disappointments are put in their way, you feel it, don't you? You feel it yourself.
100%. It is absolutely really deflating, because you look forward to that time where you can say to a family, we've found the person, we've charged them, we're going to trial.
Quite often, and in these cases where DNA becomes available, you would then re-interview. Is that what happened here?
Yes, we transferred him from prison and took him to a police station where he was interviewed, and they also covered the possibility that he may have met Yulin before, had come into contact with her, and was absolutely adamant that he hadn't. And at that point, they presented the forensic evidence to him that actually, well, based on that, how can you account for your DNA being under the fingernails of Yulin Hastings if you've never had any contact with her?
And how did he respond to that?
He was described to me as a broken man. They said you could see him visibly deflate, because at that point he'd been incredibly confident and very, very cocky. And it was almost at this stage he realised that the case was turning against him, and that we were now in a much stronger position in terms of proving his involvement.
So up until now, Aaron File's excuse for not being responsible was, I wasn't there, it was nothing to do with me.
So he was confident in his mind that he hadn't left anything behind. You know, he was an experienced burglar. We knew he was wearing gloves. So the fact that we now had that DNA evidence changed everything for him. So what happened next in relation to Aaron File was that we became aware of information coming from the prison that he was now presenting that he was suffering from hallucinations and a psychotic episode.
Aaron File, a a career criminal, if you like, was starting to lay the groundwork that if I am going to go to trial, I'm going to go down this route.
And also what was really interesting in relation to that, there was no history of any psychiatric illness for Aaron Farrell prior to the moment he found out that his DNA was found under Yulin's fingernails.
Very convenient.
Incredibly convenient. So the next stage of the investigation was that, almost like a bus, so they all come together, and we got more DNA evidence against Aaron. So his coat had been submitted for forensic examination, and on his coat, blood was found, and that blood was sent off for DNA, and it was Yulin's DNA.
You and your team did incredible work. I don't think people quite appreciate the emotional journey that a case like this would take you on. The highs, the lows. When you went to the CPS and they were saying, is there any reason, is there any lawful reason why Aaron Farrell's DNA would be on Yulin, I don't think anyone could argue there would be a lawful reason why Yulin's blood would be on Aaron Farrell.
No, absolutely not. Why would her blood be on his coat? So that was literally the turning point in terms of the CPS. In August 2018, we now have authority charge from the CPS. At the beginning, there was all those challenges which made me do something I have never, ever done before, which was I physically went to prison to charge him myself to make sure he got charged. I just wanted to do it myself. I wanted to look him in the face and do it myself to show him that we'd beaten him and he hadn't won.
When a person is charged with murder, they have a few, not many, but a few defences open to them. And there are two types of defence. There are a full defence where, if proven, they will be guilty of no offence at all. The same is true with insanity. Then there are a set of defences known as partial defences. Seems to me he was trying to play the game.
It was 100% trying to play a game, and it was becoming tiresome at that point. It was becoming really tiresome because he had been playing the system for so long, and it was making me incredibly angry.
As an SIO, it's not often that you would get to charge someone. It must have been incredibly satisfying.
It was very satisfying for me. I think what you can probably pick up from what I'm saying to you and what I'm telling you is I was taking this one very personally, and I had a real vested interest to ensure that Aaron Farrell stood trial for the murder of Yulin Hastings.
How did he react to that?
Gave the impression that he didn't understand what I was saying to him, and my response was, if you think this is going to be a situation where you're not going to go to court and you're not going to go to trial, you're completely wrong, because you are going to trial.
A real moment to be able to go to the family and say that you've been on this journey with us. We know it's not been easy, but we're now starting to come towards the end of it. Aaron Farrell has now been charged with your mother's murder.
So after Aaron Farrell's been charged in August 2018 with the burglary and the homicide of Yulin Hastings, what we start to experience with him is that there's a massive deterioration with his mental health. So he is now stating that he's unfit to stand trial. Now that caused massive delays. So we eventually went to trial in December of 2019, which is 15 months after Aaron had been charged.
So this is quite an unusual case in that I've been in this situation many, many times. people will use the system, use the defence of diminished responsibility.
Within his defence case statement, he admitted committing the burglary at Yulin's address. He admitted that he had assaulted Yulin, but stated that when he was in the property, he saw what he believed to be a demon coming down the stairs that was a half man, half goat, and that he was in fear of his own life, and therefore he struck out at that demon with the table that we'd found in the address on the very first day that we went in. But what was really incredulous in terms of that defence was it was a momentary psychotic episode that only lasted when he saw what was Yulin, who was confronting him because he'd broken into her house. And it just defied any logic at all. And quite why he thought that that was a plausible defence, I have no idea.
He actually was acting out in self-defence, and that's why he killed this poor mother of three. So to me, this seems completely desperate. He's clutching at straws.
A phrase commonly associated with murder investigations, particularly at court trials, is diminished responsibility. It's a defence put forward by a defendant to say that at the time of committing the act, they were suffering from some kind of mental episode. If this is accepted as a defence, what it means is, instead of being found guilty of murder, they will be found guilty of manslaughter. And this obviously attracts a far lower sentence, prison sentence.
I think that File, from his perspective, he thinks he's playing a psychological game of chess against the police. But now they've got this overwhelming evidence against him, they've put him in checkmate.
Prosecution case is presented pretty tight. You know, we've got a really good case, we've got the forensic evidence, and we can put Aaron there in a really, really important, critical trial.
So the court usher will say to the jury, foreman, foreperson, have you reached a decision at which you all agree? They would have said yes. What happened then?
On the 10th of January 2020, Aaron File was given a full life sentence with a minimum term of 31 years to serve for the murder of Yulin Hastings. He was also given 7 years and 8 months for the 2 burglary offences, which would run concurrently with the murder.
Obviously, no sentence is ever going to bring Yulin back. How did the family feel in terms of that sentence that was passed?
I think it was a case of pretty much the same as we were. It was a case of relief, and it was a case that it had ended. So from the point of discovering Yulin's body to the point of him, Aaron File, being sentenced, that was 2 years. That was a really long time. That's much longer than it should have taken. He was a callous individual, and they had no remorse for him whatsoever. And they also talked about how the thoughts of what happened to their mother will live with them forever.
Yulin Hastings was a loved person, and she was at home in the one place you should feel most safe, but she wasn't. Aaron File broke into her home and attacked her.
Aaron File was a calculating, callous individual.
This was a harrowing case, and I think you'll agree from watching the reaction of Senior Investigation Officer Richard Leonard, just how much this crime affected the team, how personally they took it.
He preyed on an elderly, defenceless female, and 31 years was a significant sentence and was completely justified.
From my point of view, he got the maximum term he could possibly get, so he met what the judicial system wanted him to have.
So this was a truly shocking case that's destroyed the life of a family and of a lady who literally committed her life and career to helping other people, and her life was stolen by File, and he was quite rightly sentenced to 31 years in prison.
For me, that reflected the horrific nature of this case and just how despicably he'd acted throughout.
File not only ended Yulene's life, but he destroyed the family home. He took away some of her treasured possessions, and the repercussions, the echoes of her death, spread through the community in a very horrific, tragic manner.
Hopefully this sentence will give some comfort and a feeling of justice, not only to Yulene's family, but the community that clearly cared and loved her.